You don't need to come tonight. My mother doesn't want you here. That was the message my husband sent me on the night of the grand celebration for his mother's new mansion in Lomas de Chapultepec. The mansion I had paid for, down to the last brick. I stared at the screen for a long second, then typed back with a calm that even surprised me. Understood, darling. They had used me, dismissed me, humiliated me. So I decided they would taste the consequences. Within minutes, I locked every account, froze every transfer, and reclaimed every peso they believed they could steal from me. An hour later, their calls began, frantic, relentless, almost feral. Maricela pressed her fingertips to her temples as she refreshed the screen of her business laptop. There it was, the confirmation that the final multi-million peso payment for the Chapultepec estate had been reversed and placed under legal dispute. The house wasn't for her. It had never been for her. It was for her mother-in-law, Doña Eulalia, the woman who had spent years feeding off her sacrifices while pretending she didn't exist. If you are watching this video right now, leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. Let me see how I get my revenge on them. I always believed life had finally softened toward me the day I met Tadeo Montelongo, because, until then, my existence had been nothing but a long corridor of responsibilities that were never supposed to be mine. I, Maricela Andrade, had spent my entire youth working the kind of jobs that leave your back stiff by sunset and your hands swollen by morning, all because my parents in Guadalajara depended on me more than they ever admitted. From the age of 19, I woke before dawn to catch the first bus toward the Maquiladora in Zapopan, came back late with the smell of metal and dust stuck to my clothes, then used whatever strength remained to help my mother close the tiny shop she ran so we could afford my father's medicine. Every dream I once had, whether it was studying design, opening a small boutique, or traveling to places I had only seen in magazines, slowly dissolved each time I counted the money on the kitchen table and realized it had to go somewhere else. By the time I reached my late 20s, the only thing that felt truly mine was exhaustion. That was the version of myself who met Tadeo, a man who spoke softly and held my hand gently, who said things like he admired my strength, that he respected everything I had done for my family, that he wanted to build a life with me where I wouldn't have to carry the world alone anymore. I let myself believe him. I let myself think that maybe, finally, someone saw me, not for what I could provide, but for who I was. I had no idea that he was leading me toward the very same trap I had escaped from, a life where my value would be measured only by how much I could endure. When we married, I moved to Mexico City for a better job at an export fashion company, eventually climbing into a high-level position after years of proving myself. Meanwhile, Tadeo drifted between jobs, always promising the next opportunity would be the one that stuck. I justified every failure. Every month he couldn't cover his half of the rent. Every business idea he abandoned after 3 weeks. I told myself that love demanded patience, that maybe he simply needed the kind of support no one had ever given him. And when his mother, Doña Eulalia, entered the picture, I repeated that same logic as if it were scripture. At first, I tried to win her over. She was a woman who carried herself as if the entire neighborhood of Tláhuac owed her an apology, someone who mistook coldness for authority and condescension for elegance. Still, I brought groceries to her house, helped her with her appointments, bought her gifts on Mother's Day, even before I officially married her son. I thought her stiffness would melt eventually, that she would see how much I cared for Tadeo, and, in time, care for me too. Instead, she looked at everything I did as if it were the bare minimum she deserved. I remember one afternoon particularly clearly. I had just come from a 14-hour shift and still decided to stop by her place with a bag of things I noticed she was running out of. She barely glanced at me before saying, "It's good you brought something. A daughter-in-law should never come empty-handed." That was the moment I realized she never saw me as a person, only as a resource. And yet, for reasons I still can't fully understand, I continued trying. Maybe it was the lifelong habit of pleasing others. Maybe it was the belief that good intentions eventually pay off. Or maybe it was because I had never been loved in a way that didn't require sacrifice. So I didn't know how to expect anything else. When my career finally flourished and my income grew higher than anything my family had ever imagined possible, I thought this was my chance to build something stable with Tadeo, something ours. I wanted to save for our own home, maybe in a quiet neighborhood, somewhere with enough space for a garden like the one my father dreamed about. But Tadeo had a different idea. One night, he came home with the kind of look that always meant trouble. The mixture of guilt, strategy, and forced tenderness he used when he wanted something significant from me. He told me his mother couldn't keep living in that deteriorating house in Tláhuac, that it was unworthy of her, that she, a woman who had given him everything, deserved a proper place to spend her last years. When I reminded him gently that we were supposed to be saving for our own future, he lowered his eyes, sighed dramatically, and played the card he knew would break me. I feel like such a failure as a son. What followed was a long speech about devotion, gratitude, aging, and filial duty, wrapped carefully in emotional pressure. By the time he finished, I felt like refusing would make me heartless. I didn't realize until much later that this was the beginning of my undoing. He asked me to buy a house for his mother in Lomas de Chapultepec. I thought I misheard him. Not even we lived anywhere close to that level of luxury. Yet, he spoke as if it were completely reasonable. When I hesitated, he pressed harder, painting scenarios where Doña Eulalia would finally accept me, where our marriage would become stronger, where I'd be helping him repair the wounds he carried from childhood. And like a fool trained by life to fix every broken thing around me, I agreed. From that moment on, everything revolved around the house. I handled every document, paid every deposit, negotiated every contract, covered every remodeling cost, and transferred every peso. Tadeo and his mother only appeared for photo opportunities or to criticize paint colors they weren't paying for. They never asked if I was tired. They never said thank you. They simply consumed, demanded, and expected. And still, I convinced myself it would all be worth it. But the breaking point, the moment the truth became impossible to ignore, arrived the night of the housewarming party, a celebration entirely funded by my labor, my youth, my sacrifices, a celebration from which, ironically, I would soon discover I was not welcome. The day of the housewarming party began like any other, with me waking up early, drinking lukewarm coffee while staring at the dress I had designed myself for the occasion. A soft rose gold gown meant to symbolize a new chapter, one I foolishly believed would finally include me as part of the Montalongo family. I had planned everything meticulously during the past weeks, from the imported flowers to the catering menu that featured wagyu sliders and tiny bites of truffle-infused dishes. Every extravagance chosen, not because Doña Eulalia deserved it, but because I wanted to prove, perhaps to myself more than to anyone, that I was capable of giving her a life she never had. But that morning, as I stood in the quiet of my apartment in Polanco, I couldn't shake the tension lingering in my chest, the echo of the conversation I had overheard the night before, when Tadeo, thinking I was already asleep, whispered into the phone with his mother. His voice was low, conspiratorial, and it sliced through me in a way that left my stomach cold. See, Mama, everything is handled. Marcella already transferred the remaining amount today. Don't worry, our plan is safe. You know what you have to do after. I remember standing behind the slightly open bedroom door, holding my breath as though exhaling would shatter my entire life into pieces I wouldn't know how to collect. I wanted to believe I had misunderstood, that the word plan didn't mean what I feared, that the timing was a coincidence, not an intention. I spent the rest of the night repeating to myself like a prayer that Tadeo loved me, that he wouldn't conspire with anyone, much less his mother, to harm me in any way. But even as I tried to rationalize, there was something in his tone, something smug, something dismissive, that squeezed my heart like a fist. When morning arrived, Tadeo left early under the excuse of helping with the final arrangements at the mansion in Lomas de Chapultepec. I asked if I could go with him, maybe check the catering or verify the decorations, but he stopped in the doorway and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. An expression that felt almost territorial. No, Maricela, there are too many people, and it's all chaotic. Better if you come later, just looking beautiful. You're the protagonist tonight. The protagonist? I almost laughed at the irony. What kind of protagonist wasn't allowed on her own stage? But I swallowed my doubts. I always did. At the office, I tried reviewing contracts and supplier orders, but my mind drifted continuously to the housewarming party, to the silence of my phone, to the possibility that something irreversible was happening without me. I stared for minutes at the rose gold dress hanging in my office closet, imagining myself standing beside Tadeo, proud and glowing. I imagined Doña Eulalia finally acknowledging my efforts, even if just with a nod that didn't drip with disdain. I imagined, foolishly, being seen. By 4 in the afternoon, I left work early. I showered, did my hair slowly, applied makeup with careful strokes, trying to steady the tremor in my hands. I told myself everything was fine. When I called Tadeo to ask if he was coming to pick me up or if I should go on my own, the phone rang without an answer. I texted him, and the little check marks appeared, then turned blue. But he didn't reply. When I called Doña Eulalia, she rejected the call immediately, twice. My breath hitched in my chest. Maybe she pressed the wrong button, I told myself, even though deep down I knew she hadn't pressed anything by accident in her entire life. At 6 p.m., fully dressed, makeup flawless, hair done, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the reflection in my vanity mirror. The woman looking back at me seemed like a stranger. Beautiful, yes, but hollowed out, fragile, almost trembling under the weight of her own hope. I called Tadeo again, straight to voicemail. My chest tightened. Something was wrong. Something was profoundly, undeniably wrong. At 6:30, when the party was supposed to be starting, I was still in my bedroom, the gift I had commissioned from a sculptor in Oaxaca, sitting neatly wrapped on the bed beside me, mocking me with its elegance. I felt like an idiot. I felt like a child waiting to be chosen and never being called. My throat burned. I grabbed my phone and sent one last message, simple, polite, desperate. Honey, I'm ready. Leaving now. The gray checks appeared instantly. I held my breath, waiting for them to turn blue. They didn't. Minutes crawled by. My heart beat so loudly, I thought the walls could hear it. Then, at 6:45 p.m., the phone vibrated violently in my hand. I unlocked the screen with trembling fingers. It was one message from Tadeo, a single sentence, the sentence that confirmed every suspicion that had been clawing at me. You don't need to come tonight. My mother doesn't want you here. I read it once, then again, unable to process the brutality of it. The words didn't feel real. They felt like a hallucination, like something my mind invented out of fear. When the meaning finally settled, the phone slipped from my hands and landed on my lap. My breath caught in my throat. The room felt colder. My vision blurred for a moment. And then, the realization washed over me like a wave that nearly dragged me under. They used me. They took my money, my time, my youth, my sacrifices. And the moment I became inconvenient, when the house was fully paid, when the party was funded, when everything was secured, they discarded me like I was nothing more than an expired card, a financial tool that had finished serving its purpose. My chest tightened with a sharp, slicing pain. Not sadness, not heartbreak, humiliation, and beneath it, something colder, something unfamiliar, something that felt like steel forming beneath my skin. Anger, the kind that doesn't scream, the kind that doesn't shake, the kind that sharpens. I stared at myself in the mirror, at the flawless makeup, the elegant dress, the expensive gift, the woman who had given everything and received nothing. And I whispered to my reflection, steady and quiet, enough, enough. That single word didn't come from a place of fury or despair, but from a place inside me I had forgotten existed, a quiet and steady core forged from every year I had spent surviving, providing, enduring. As I sat there in that rose gold gown that suddenly felt like armor rather than decoration, a strange calm settled over me, as if a storm had finally stopped raging and left behind a silence that demanded action instead of tears. I picked up my phone again, not with trembling hands this time, but with a deliberate steadiness, and opened Tadeo's message once more, reading it until the cruelty of it no longer stung, but instead crystallized into clarity. You don't need to come tonight. My mother doesn't want you here. The audacity of that sentence, the entitlement embedded in every word, worked on me the way a sculptor chips at stone. It revealed something underneath, something stronger. My lips curled into a small, cold smile, one I had never seen on my own face before. Without hesitation, I typed a short reply. Understood, darling, and sent it. I knew exactly what Tadeo would feel when he read it. Relief. He would think I had submitted yet again, that I would accept this humiliation as I had accepted every sacrifice, every insult, every request he and his mother had ever placed upon me. He would think he had gotten away with it. He had no idea that in that instant, he had created the version of me he would come to fear. After sending the message, I stood up, removed the rose gold dress carefully, and hung it back in the closet. Then I walked to the small office space I kept inside the apartment, the one filled with invoices, contracts, corporate files, and the tools I used every day to keep multi-million peso operations moving across borders. My personal phone stayed abandoned on the vanity. I didn't need it anymore. Instead, I opened a drawer and took out a second phone. My work phone, the one with direct access to every executive, banker, supplier, and legal advisor I had spent years cultivating relationships with. The moment the screen lit up, showing my business profile photo, something clicked inside me. This was the version of myself that never trembled, never hesitated, never apologized for being competent. This was the woman I had buried under love and duty and sacrifice. And she was done being quiet. I typed the first number with precision. Mr. Sterling, my private banker, a man who had managed my assets for half a decade with strict discretion and an understanding that my instructions were never to be questioned. The call connected on the first ring. "Good evening, Ms. Andrade," he said with his usual calm professionalism, though I could hear the alertness in his tone. It wasn't common for me to call him at night. "I need your full attention," I said, my voice firm, steady. No trace of the woman who had almost cried an hour earlier. "I have several urgent requests that must be executed immediately." He didn't ask for explanations. "I'm ready. Tell me what you need." I began with the most immediate wound, the one bleeding money every hour. Cancel all automatic payments and scheduled transfers from any of my accounts to Residenciales Chapultepec S.A. or any entity associated with the Lomas de Chapultepec property, I instructed. Effective now, no exceptions. I want a full freeze on every outgoing peso related to that house. I could hear him typing rapidly. "Understood, Ms. Andrade. Canceling all direct debits now." "Next," I continued, "I need confirmation of whose name appears on the purchase agreement for the Chapultepec property." He paused, then answered. The contract lists the primary beneficiary as Doña Eulalia Montalongo. You are registered as the full financial guarantor and payer. My throat tightened, not from pain, but from vindication. Perfect, I said. Now listen carefully. I want the bank's legal department to place a dispute and a temporary freeze on the property transfer. I don't care what justification you use, possible fraud, coercion, irregularities. Select whatever option creates the most complications. I will not sign final transfer papers under any circumstance. Mr. Sterling inhaled sharply. Ms. Andrade, that could trigger a lengthy legal process. I'm aware, I said coldly. Do it anyway. His tone shifted fully into seriousness. I'll contact legal immediately. Finally, I added, block all secondary cards tied to my account. Those in the names of Tadeo Montalongo and Eulalia Montalongo. Permanently, not temporarily. Effective 10 minutes ago. Understood, he replied. Their cards are now disabled. I ended the call. One artery cut, 2 more to go. The next call was to Mr. Carmona, the marketing director from the real estate group overseeing the Lomas de Chapultepec development. He answered cheerfully at first, clearly unaware of the chaos about to disrupt his evening. The moment I introduced myself, his tone sharpened. Ms. Andrade, is everything all right? The housewarming event should be underway. There's a serious problem, I interrupted, injecting a subtle tremor into my voice, just enough to convey urgency without revealing my intent. I'm the guarantor and full payer of that property, and I've just discovered that my husband and his mother have conspired to appropriate the house without my consent. What? He exclaimed. Ma'am, this is extremely concerning. I'm informing you formally, I continued. I am disputing the entire transaction. The transfer must be put on hold, and you must send security and legal personnel to the property right now and prevent anyone from taking the keys. If the developer hands over the house to Doña Eulalia, your company will be complicit in fraud. The panic in his voice was immediate. I will dispatch the team at once. We'll freeze the property status and halt all transfers. Good, I said, then ended the call before he could ask anything else. 2 arteries are cut. 1 final blow left. The last call was to my own company, to Licenciado Herrera, head of operations. I informed him that effective tomorrow morning, Tadeo Montalongo was terminated from his position as marketing director, a title he had never earned, but had enjoyed because of me. The black Suburban registered under company assets would be collected at 9 a.m. sharp from wherever it happened to be. His payroll account would be frozen immediately. Herrera sounded startled, but obeyed without question. My word was final. When I hung up the phone, a strange quietness filled the room. Not emptiness, but clarity. The clarity of a woman reclaiming what was hers, one command at a time. And for the first time in years, I felt something surprising surge through my chest. Not grief, not fear, power. While I sat in the quiet of my apartment, letting the weight of my decisions settle into my bones like a slow, deliberate exhale, the mansion in Lomas de Chapultepec was bursting with lights, music, and the overflowing arrogance of people who believed they had secured a future built entirely on my back. I could almost picture the scene even without being there. The enormous chandeliers imported from Italy, casting warm reflections over the polished marble floors, the tables covered in white roses and lilies arranged at obscene prices. The guests, Doña Eulalia's church friends, her social club acquaintances, distant relatives who only appeared for spectacle, wandering around the house as if tasting ownership with every step they took. Tadeo, always eager to impress, would be walking from group to group with that forced charm he used whenever he wanted to hide his insecurities. And Eulalia, oh, I could imagine her perfectly, wearing some gown she suggested I pay for. Smiling like a queen, finally ascending to the throne she believed the world had denied her. She would lift her glass to her guests, praising her son for being an exemplary hijo who knew how to honor his mother. Not a single soul there would know that every brick in that mansion, every petal in those arrangements, every drop of champagne poured into crystal flutes had come from my labor, my sacrifices, my sleepless nights, my youth surrendered, and none of them, not one, would care. But the universe has a way of correcting imbalance, and I knew it was only a matter of time before the first crack appeared. It happened when the catering manager, a man with impeccable posture and a thick French accent, approached Tadeo with a polite smile and the handheld payment terminal resting lightly in his palm. "Senor Montalongo," he likely said, "per the contract, we require the remaining 50% of the catering fee tonight." Tadeo, smug and comfortable, would have reached into his wallet without hesitation, pulling out the sparkling platinum card I had given him as a gesture of trust 2 years prior. He must have handed it over lightly, expecting the payment to glide through effortlessly, the way it always did. But instead of approval, he would have heard the sharp, unmistakable beep of a declined transaction. The caterer would have frowned slightly, cleaning the terminal screen, trying again as Tadeo's smile tightened. Another beep, another rejection. "Impossible," Tadeo must have muttered, a chill rolling down his spine, because, for the first time since we married, he realized something he had never allowed himself to consider. His comfort had always been a bubble, and I was the one who had kept it inflated. Meanwhile, across the room, Doña Eulalia would be basking in the attention of her friends, waving her hands dramatically as she talked about how the marble was imported, how the ceilings were hand-painted, how her son had always been destined for greatness. But around the time the caterer approached her with the same payment request, because in their contract, both she and Tadeo were listed as the responsible parties, her face would have lost color. Not because she felt guilt, but because embarrassment was a feeling she could not tolerate. It was an emotion reserved for people she considered inferior. She would have narrowed her heavily lined eyes, probably blamed the caterer, blamed the terminal, blamed the Wi-Fi, blamed anything, before daring to wonder whether the problem came from me. But that doubt, small and sharp as a hairline crack in glass, would begin to spread. And then, not 10 minutes later, the second wave of consequences would arrive. The real estate company's legal team and security personnel would walk through the front doors with stiff postures and urgent faces. They would look out of place among the glittering guests, and the murmur of confusion would ripple across the party like wind moving across a lake. "We have instructions to halt the transfer of the property," the lead attorney would announce. "There is an active dispute filed by the financial guarantor." I can only imagine how Tadeo's mouth must have fallen open, how Eulalia's nostrils must have flared. They would demand explanations, but the team would be firm. Protocol was protocol, and once a legal freeze was placed, not even tears, threats, or entitlement could undo it on the spot. The keys could not be released. The property could not be officially occupied. Every guest present would now know that something was terribly wrong. Someone would lower the music. Someone else would step outside to whisper into a phone. And slowly, like air leaking out of a balloon, the illusion of Montelongo's prestige would collapse in front of everyone they had tried so hard to impress. Tadeo would check his phone, maybe a dozen times, searching for a message from me, a call, anything that could reassure him that this was all some misunderstanding. His fingers must have shaken as he tried using his card again at the bar or with the decorators, only to face failure after failure. The reality would settle in his chest like ice. Every lifeline he counted on was gone, and Eulalia, unable to mask her mounting panic, would begin barking orders, insisting someone find Tadeo an explanation, insisting the bank was mistaken, insisting that I wouldn't dare interfere with her event. But then someone, a neighbor, a cousin, one of her church women, would murmur the first speculation aloud. "Did Maricela do this?" And in that instant, I knew exactly what Eulalia would feel. Not sadness, not fear. Rage. Rage at realizing that the woman she had dismissed for years, the woman she had excluded only hours earlier, the woman she believed she could manipulate forever, had finally shown her teeth. The party would not end with applause, nor with speeches, nor with the triumphant unveiling they had rehearsed in their minds. No, the night would end with whispers, with hurried exits, with guests avoiding eye contact as security escorted contractors out, and the legal team documented every irregularity. And at the center of it all, my husband, the man who had betrayed me, would be staring at his dead phone, his dead cards, his dead power, wondering when everything had slipped out of his hands, wondering how he had made the fatal mistake of thinking I would stay silent forever. And in my apartment, miles away, soaking quietly in a warm bath scented with lavender, the phone I had abandoned on the vanity began vibrating again and again, echoing through the dimly lit room as call after call came in. First from Tadeo, then from Eulalia, then from numbers I didn't recognize. I didn't move. I didn't touch the phone. I simply closed my eyes and let their panic wash over me like a distant storm breaking somewhere far away, no longer capable of reaching me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't the woman who chased approval. I was the woman they should have never underestimated. The calls continued for nearly an hour, vibrating endlessly against the glass surface of my vanity, like a desperate insect trapped inside a jar. But I stayed in the bathtub until the water turned lukewarm and my fingers wrinkled at the tips. letting the lavender steam settle into my lungs as if it were cleansing years of humiliation from the inside out. When I finally rose and wrapped myself in a towel, I didn't feel anger. Anger was a fire I had extinguished earlier. What I felt now was something steadier, something that flowed through me with the precision of a sharpened blade. Resolve. I walked back into the bedroom and glanced at the glowing phone screen where dozens of missed calls and frantic messages waited like abandoned children, begging for attention. I didn't open a single one. I powered the phone off, placed it face down, and walked away as easily as I would walk away from a turned-off lamp. It was nearly 9:30 p.m. when I curled into the bed, still warm from the bath, and for the first time in months, maybe years, I fell asleep without waiting for approval from anyone. No fear, no second-guessing, no emotional bargaining, just silence. The next morning, sunlight flooded my room with a warmth that felt almost foreign, like a language I had once spoken fluently but had forgotten along the way. I sat up slowly, letting my eyes adjust to the brightness, and realized that something fundamental inside me had shifted. The version of myself who tolerated insults, who doubted her worth, who believed love had to be earned through sacrifice. That woman had died last night. In her place stood someone I had buried long ago. The Maricela who knew her power. The Maricela who built a career from nothing. The Maricela who could negotiate contracts with executives twice her age and twice her arrogance. I showered, dressed in a simple black outfit, tied my hair back, and made myself a strong cup of coffee. As I stirred in the sugar, I watched the quiet apartment around me, the life I had built without help from any Montalongo, and wondered how I had ever allowed myself to forget who I was. I had spent years waiting to be accepted by people who were incapable of seeing beyond their own egos. People who loved only what I provided, never who I was. People who believed my devotion was an endless resource. But now they were about to learn what scarcity felt like. At 10 a.m., I unlocked the work phone, the same one that had let me dismantle Tadeo's world the night before, and saw several messages from Mr. Sterling and the real estate group confirming every action I had ordered. The property transfer was officially frozen. The developer had halted access. The Montalongos were arguing on-site with security late into the night. The catering company had filed a complaint for non-payment. The staff contractors had begun removing equipment after being informed that payment was no longer guaranteed. Every thread that held the illusion of the Montalongos' prestige together had snapped. I took another sip of coffee, savoring its bitterness like truth. It didn't feel vengeful. It felt necessary. It felt overdue. Around noon, there was a loud, aggressive knock at my apartment door. 3 sharp bangs followed by the unmistakable voice of Tadeo shouting my name. Maricela, ábreme, por favor. We need to talk. This has gone too far. His voice cracked, something I had rarely heard, not out of remorse, but out of fear. I walked to the door silently, but didn't open it. Through the peephole, I saw him. Hair messy, shirt wrinkled, face drenched in humiliation, standing there with his phone in one hand and a crumpled jacket in the other. He looked smaller. Not physically, spiritually. Behind him, pacing in the hallway like a furious general deprived of her troops, was Doña Eulalia, her lips pursed into a thin, venomous line. Even through the door, I could see how disoriented she was, like someone who had been thrown into cold water unexpectedly. She was muttering something under her breath, probably about respect or betrayal, or how I had dared to interrupt the coronation night she believed she deserved. Tadeo banged on the door again. Marisela, please, you can't do this to us. Everything is falling apart. Let us in so we can fix this. Fix this. As if the problem were logistical, not moral. As if betrayal were something that could be undone with negotiation. As if I owed them a repair. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I didn't give them anything, not even my voice. After several minutes of silence, the banging stopped. I heard footsteps moving away. Then Eulalia's voice rising again, sharp and furious, as if blaming him for losing control of the woman he thought he had tamed. When they finally left, I felt no relief, no regret, only clarity. That afternoon, I went to the office of Licenciado Najera, a well-respected family law attorney in Mexico City. His office smelled of cedarwood and legal battles won long before I arrived. When he asked why I was there, I recited the facts with calm precision. The financial exploitation, the emotional manipulation, the planned exclusion from the house I had paid for, and the coordinated effort to remove me once my usefulness expired. His expression darkened with a mixture of anger and professional satisfaction. "Señora Andrade," he said, leaning back in his leather chair, "what you have described is not only morally reprehensible, it may constitute legal fraud. You are not the one who should be afraid. They are." I felt something warm spread through my chest, a sense of liberation so profound it nearly brought tears to my eyes. For once, someone in authority wasn't minimizing my experience. For once, I wasn't being told to endure. Najera continued outlining potential legal strategies: recovery of funds, annulment of spousal privileges, even a civil suit against the Montelongo family for financial abuse. As he spoke, I didn't feel vindictive. I felt alive. When I left his office, the sunlight outside felt warm on my face, as if the world had reopened after years of being closed. I didn't look back. I didn't hesitate. I walked forward with a steadiness I had not felt in a long time. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to save anyone else. I was finally saving myself. I returned home from Licenciado Najera's office with a sense of direction I hadn't felt in years, almost like I had been wandering through a dense forest and suddenly found the first clear trail leading out. As I stepped into my apartment, I realized how quiet everything was. The kind of silence that used to frighten me because it reminded me of abandonment, of isolation, of being alone with responsibilities that no one else would shoulder. But this time, the silence felt earned, peaceful, almost sacred. I placed my purse on the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and allowed the calm to seep into my bones. I didn't check my personal phone because there was nothing left on it that belonged to me anymore. Only demands, panic, manipulation, apologies crafted as traps, and promises written with the same ink of betrayal. Instead, I grabbed my business phone and sat in front of my computer, organizing documents, timelines, screenshots, and receipts for Nahera's legal team. Every file I saved felt like another brick I was placing back into the foundation of my own life, reclaiming the pieces that had been stripped from me slowly, deliberately, over the years. I was halfway through compiling the financial transfers when the doorbell rang. Not a soft ring, not a hesitant one. This was firm, persistent, the kind of ringing that carries entitlement in its rhythm. I didn't need to look through the peephole to know who it was, but I did anyway, and there he stood. Tadeo, with dark circles under his eyes, hair disheveled, face twisted in a mixture of frustration and desperation. Behind him, standing slightly to the side as if she were royalty, shielding herself from the peasantry, was Doña Eulalia, arms crossed, jaw clenched, her expression so tight it looked carved from stone. I felt nothing, not anger, not fear, not even curiosity, just nothing. Tadeo saw movement through the peephole and straightened himself, attempting to gather the remnants of dignity he hadn't yet lost. "Marcella," he said loudly, trying to sound calm, "I know you're there. We need to talk." His voice carried that same pleading urgency he used whenever he wanted something, but it no longer stirred anything inside me. It was like hearing a worn-out song I had finally stopped singing along to. "Please," he continued, knocking again. "Let's not do this. Let us in. We can fix the misunderstandings. You've made your point." Behind him, Eulalia scoffed so loudly it reached me through the door. "Misunderstanding?" she hissed. "This is an attack. She has humiliated us in front of the entire colonia. She owes us an explanation." The word "owes" slithered under my skin, not with the sting it once carried, but with clarity. They truly believed I owed them something. They truly believed my labor, my money, my youth, my dignity had been theirs by right. I didn't open the door. I didn't respond. I simply waited in the quiet of my own space until their voices grew louder, angrier, and more impatient. Tadeo knocked harder. "Maricela, please. This is getting out of control. Security came to the house last night. They said you contested the property. Why? Why would you do that without talking to me first?" I closed my eyes for a moment, almost amused at the irony. This man, who dismissed me from the party of the home I paid for, was now angry that I made decisions without consulting him. Eulalia's voice pierced the hallway again. "This is what happens when you marry beneath your level, mijo. I warned you. Women who don't have real families of their own become obsessed with control. She's unstable." The words floated through the door like smoke, heavy, suffocating. But they didn't hurt. Not anymore. If anything, they reminded me of something Licenciado Najera said. People reveal who they truly are when their access to you is cut off. And here they were, stripped of access, stripped of benefits, stripped of control, revealing their truest selves. After 10 minutes of shouting, banging, and pacing, the noise quieted. Through the peephole, I watched them walk away, their bodies tense and defeated, and I felt another piece of my old self fall away like dry skin. The rest of the day passed quietly. I made myself a simple lunch, cleaned my apartment, and even played a few old songs I used to love before my marriage consumed every corner of my life. I felt myself remembering things I hadn't thought about in years. how I used to love painting on weekends, how I used to meet friends in cafes and laugh until my stomach hurt, how I once believed happiness was something I deserved, not something I had to earn through servitude. Around sunset, I stepped onto my small balcony overlooking the city. The air smelled like warm pavement and distant street food, and the lights of Mexico City flickered below with a kind of heartbeat rhythm. For the first time in a long time, the view didn't make me feel trapped. It made me feel alive. Somewhere in that moment, I realized I didn't miss Tadeo. I didn't miss Eulalia. I didn't miss the family I had tried so hard to belong to. I only missed myself, the woman I had abandoned to please people who were never meant to be pleased. And now that I had found her again, I promised I would never lose her. That night, while sipping tea on the balcony, I opened my laptop and began searching for something I had forgotten how to look for: a future that belonged to me. I didn't know yet what it would look like, but for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of starting over. I was afraid of something else, ever going back to who I used to be. The following days unfolded in a strange mixture of serenity and tension, like standing in the eye of a hurricane where the air feels deceptively still, even though destruction swirls on every side. I woke up each morning with a clarity I had never experienced before, as if someone had wiped clean the fog that had covered the lenses of my life for years. I made my coffee slowly, savoring its warmth, not rushing to check messages or prepare myself for someone else's demands. I no longer organized my day around Tadeo's moods or Doña Eulalia's whims. For the first time in my adult life, my time was mine. Yet, that stillness didn't mean the storm had passed. Every day, the cameras outside my apartment captured footage of Tadeo's car driving by, sometimes slowly, sometimes circling the block, occasionally parking for several minutes before speeding away. Other times, it was Eulalia's old tan SUV, the one she drove like a tank through the streets of Mexico City, pulling up in front of my building as if she were performing reconnaissance. They never knocked again, but their presence, silent, calculating, persistent, reminded me that people who feel entitled to your life don't surrender easily. I saved every clip, every timestamp, every suspicious stop, forwarding them to Licenciado Nájera with calm precision. "Excellent," he said in one of his voice messages. "Their desperation will only strengthen our case." I believed him, but belief didn't erase the hollow ache in my chest each time I remembered how casually they had tried to discard me. One afternoon, as I was reviewing my bank statements from the past 2 years, tracing every peso I had poured into the Montelongo's bottomless pit of needs, I felt a sudden wave of sadness, not for them, but for myself. There on the screen were transactions I had forgotten I made, expenses I had justified as help, gifts I had labeled as kindness, deposits I had convinced myself were temporary. Seeing it all laid out so clearly, lines of numbers that told the story of my slow erosion, made me realize how long I had been living in survival mode, camouflaging my suffering beneath responsibility. And yet, even in that heaviness, there was relief. I wasn't drowning anymore. I wasn't gasping for breath. I was resurfacing. Late that same afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the skyline, painting the windows of my building with soft orange light, there was another knock at the door, this one softer, hesitant. I approached carefully, expecting to see Tadeo or Eulalia again, but when I looked through the peephole, I saw an unfamiliar woman, young, professionally dressed, holding a folder in her hands and wearing an expression too polite to be casual. I opened the door just enough to speak. "Good evening," she said gently. "Are you Mrs. Marcela Andrade?" Her tone set off every internal alarm. "Who are you?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. She reached into her bag and pulled out an official badge with the emblem of the Secretaría de Desarrollo Social. "My name is Ana Robles. I'm a social investigator. We've received a report that you may be in an at-risk situation involving confusion, unusual financial behavior, and potential vulnerability. I need to conduct a wellness check." My stomach dropped, not in fear, but in recognition. I didn't need her to say the names. I already knew who had filed the report. For people like the Montalongos, when manipulation fails, they escalate. "I see," I said calmly. "And who provided this report?" She avoided my eyes the way people do when they're trying to follow protocol, but feel uncomfortable with its implications. "I can only say it came from close family members." Family. The word tasted bitter. Anna shifted the folder in her hands. "May I come in? I just need to ask a few questions." I could have refused. I had every right to. But I also knew refusal would feed exactly the narrative Tadeo and Eulalia wanted to build. That I was unstable, unpredictable, perhaps even mentally unfit. So I inhaled slowly and opened the door. She stepped inside, glancing discreetly around as if making sure the space wasn't in disarray. "Your home is very organized," she said, almost surprised. I didn't respond to the compliment. She took a seat at my dining table and opened her folder. "The report mentioned that you've made sudden financial decisions, cut off communication with family, installed excessive security systems, and may be experiencing emotional distress." She read each accusation with measured neutrality, but her eyes flickered with subtle discomfort. I sat across from her, folding my hands. "I understand," I said. "Before we go any further, I'd like to call my attorney." Her eyebrows rose. "That isn't necessary," she said politely. "This isn't a legal interrogation. It's simply a wellness check." "Even better," I replied. "Then he won't mind being present." I dialed Nahera on speaker, and the moment he heard her introduction, his tone sharpened. "Señorita Robles," he said, firmly, "my client is of sound mind and is currently involved in a legal case concerning financial abuse by the same individuals who likely contacted your office. I advise you to proceed with caution." Anna's expression shifted into something resembling concern. She asked me standard cognitive questions: dates, names, current events, financial responsibility, and I answered each one with calm clarity. Her posture relaxed as she realized the truth. Nothing in my behavior aligned with the accusations. When the interview ended, she closed her folder gently. "Mrs. Andrade," she said, "I don't see any indication that you're at risk or unable to manage your life. I will be closing this case." A wave of quiet triumph warmed my chest. Not fiery, not vindictive, just deeply validating. After she left, I sat at the table for a long moment, breathing slowly, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. Tadeo and Eulalia had not only tried to control me, not only tried to exploit me, they had tried to erase me, to turn my strength into a liability, to weaponize the system against me. They had attempted to declare me incompetent. And yet, I had faced them, not with screaming, not with panic, but with clarity. As I stood and walked toward the balcony once again, evening breeze brushing against my face, I understood something with bone-deep certainty. This wasn't just a fight for my money. It wasn't even a fight for justice. It was a fight for my identity, for the right to be seen, heard, and valued on my own terms. And the war was far from over. But for the first time, I knew I was winning. The night after the wellness check, I slept with a heaviness in my chest that wasn't sadness, but something closer to grief. A quiet acknowledgement that the people I had once called family, people I had sacrificed for, defended, fed, clothed, and financed, had now weaponized even the institutions meant to protect the vulnerable. I woke up the next morning feeling both hollow and sharpened, as if my heart had been scraped clean and left with room only for truth. I brewed my coffee slowly, listening to the city stir, awake outside my window, and thought about how far I had come from the woman who used to measure her worth by how much she could endure. I wasn't that woman anymore. I couldn't be. The world outside was loud, vendors shouting on the street corner, school children running down the block, buses rumbling past. But inside my apartment, everything felt still, almost as if time itself was giving me space to breathe. I spent the morning reviewing the documents I had organized the day before, scanning through receipts, transfers, emails, and messages that painted an undeniable picture of exploitation. Every peso I'd given them was accounted for now. Not because I needed revenge, but because I needed closure. I needed to see, clearly and without illusion, the map of my own undoing. Around noon, just as I finished highlighting another cluster of transactions tied to the remodeling of the Lomas de Chapultepec house, my business phone rang. It was Licenciado Nahera. His voice, always steady, carried a new weight today. "Maricela," he said, "we need to talk in person. It's important." I agreed immediately, gathered my files, and took a taxi to his office. My pulse steady, but my mind racing with possibilities. When I arrived, his secretary ushered me into the conference room, where Najera was already waiting, several documents spread across the table. He gestured for me to sit. "They've escalated," he said, without preamble. "Tadeo and his mother have filed a formal claim against you in family court. They're attempting to have you declared mentally incompetent, permanently." I stared at him, not shocked, not even angry, but deeply disappointed. "I thought the wellness check cleared me," I said quietly. "It did," he replied, "but that was only a social services assessment. This," he tapped the folder, "is a legal petition. They're arguing that your financial decisions are evidence of instability. They're claiming your sudden changes in behavior demonstrate emotional imbalance. They're saying you're not fit to manage your own assets." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The air felt thick, as if the room itself were absorbing the weight of his words. How far were they willing to go? How much did they believe they were entitled to? "What happens next?" I finally asked. Najera took a deep breath. "We fight," he said, "and we win." He explained the process: a court hearing, a judge, evidence from both sides, and the possibility of psychological evaluations. As he spoke, I felt something simmering inside me, a slow, rising heat that was not fear, but defiance. They wanted to erase me. They wanted to rewrite who I was. They wanted to take everything I had built, piece by piece, until nothing remained of the woman I fought so hard to become. Not again. Not ever. After reviewing strategies and gathering every document that supported my case, I left Najera's office feeling strangely energized, as if preparing for battle had awakened muscles I didn't know I had. I walked several blocks before calling a taxi, letting the city's movement wash over me. Vendors frying quesadillas on street corners, a couple arguing playfully outside a bakery, teenagers laughing as they rode rented bikes along the sidewalk. Life was happening everywhere, full of color and sound, and I realized that mine could still be rebuilt into something beautiful if I protected it fiercely enough. When I got home, the hallway was quiet, but the moment I approached my apartment door, I sensed something was off. A faint rustling sound drifted from inside. My heart tightened, but I didn't panic. I stepped back, unlocked my phone, and opened the security app tied to the cameras installed throughout my home. The screen lit up with live footage. My living room, my kitchen, my bedroom. And there, standing by my dining table, flipping through my personal documents, were Tadeo and Doña Eulalia, along with a stranger, an older man in a dark suit holding a clipboard. Rage didn't hit me. Something colder did. Violation. They had used the spare key I had once given Tadeo out of trust, a key he swore he would only use for emergencies. I pressed the button that triggered the silent alarm connected to building security, then stepped back, keeping my distance from my own door. Within minutes, the building guard arrived, followed by 2 officers. I watched quietly as they knocked and announced themselves. Inside, chaos erupted, chairs scraping, papers shuffling, voices rising in panic. The officers entered, ordering everyone to stop moving. When they opened the door and found me standing there, calm and steady, Tadeo looked like he'd been caught stealing from a church altar. "Maricela, this isn't what it looks like," he stammered. But I didn't even look at him. I addressed the officers. They broke in using a key I did not authorize. They accessed my private documents without permission. I want a formal report filed. Eulalia's shrill voice cut through the room. "We are her family. We have every right to be here." I turned to her, my expression neutral, almost bored. "You forfeited that right the moment you tried to declare me unfit," I said quietly. "And this," I pointed to the scattered papers, "is evidence of your intent." The officers guided them outside, separating them while the report was taken. The man in the suit, likely another lawyer hired to strengthen their fabricated narrative, avoided my gaze entirely. When the officers finally escorted them out of the building, Eulalia's eyes pierced me with a hatred so raw it almost made me laugh. She wasn't angry that they'd been caught. She was angry that her power over me was slipping away, that she had underestimated me, that I had stopped kneeling. After they left, I locked the door, changed every lock, and sat in the middle of my living room in silence. My hands were steady. My breathing is calm. It was then, in the quiet aftermath of their intrusion, that I realized something with startling clarity. This wasn't a war I had chosen. It was a war they had created, brick by brick, insult by insult, manipulation by manipulation. But it would be me who ended it. The days that followed felt like living inside a slow-burning fuse, the kind that crackles quietly while everyone holds their breath, waiting for the explosion. After the break-in, I expected Tadeo and Eulalia to disappear for a while, to retreat and regroup, maybe even feel a shadow of shame for how far they had gone. But people like them don't feel shame. They feel ownership. So instead of retreating, they doubled down. Their lawyer filed yet another motion in court, claiming that my decision to involve the police proved my mental instability, arguing that a balanced wife would never criminalize her own husband and mother-in-law. When Licenciado Nahira read that section of the petition, he scoffed so loudly it echoed through the entire conference room. "They're desperate," he said, "and desperation makes people stupid." I almost smiled. Almost. But the reality was heavier. This wasn't just an argument anymore. This had turned into a calculated attempt to erase me on paper, to rewrite me into someone incompetent, unstable, incapable of managing my own life. And behind that attempt lay the ugliest truth of all. They believed they could succeed. They believed that a judge would look at me, a woman who had built a career from nothing, who had managed millions in international contracts, who had supported 2 adults like a one-woman welfare system, and decide that I was the one who lacked reason. And the worst part? Cases like mine existed. I wasn't the first Latina in Mexico to be targeted by her own in-laws. I wasn't the first woman whose independence threatened a fragile man's ego. I wasn't the first wife punished for refusing to be submissive. That knowledge sat inside me like a cold stone. But stones can also become anchors. They keep you grounded, steady, unshakable. I knew I had to be all of those things because these people were willing to destroy me just to keep the lifestyle I'd handed them on a silver platter. It was late one evening, maybe close to 11 p.m., when everything changed. I was reviewing evidence with Nahera over a video call, going over our strategy for the upcoming hearing, when my doorbell rang again. Once, timidly, as if the person on the other side feared their own presence. I checked the camera feed and saw a figure I did not expect. Lucia, Tadeo's younger sister. She looked thin, tired, her hair tied back in a messy ponytail, her eyes darting nervously toward the hallway. I hesitated for a moment before opening the door. She stepped inside quickly, almost as if seeking shelter from something outside. "Maricela," she said breathlessly, "I need to talk to you. It's important." I studied her face. The fear there wasn't fake. Lucia had always been quiet, overshadowed by her mother's domineering personality and her brother's ego. She had never treated me poorly, but she had also never stood up for me. She was a bystander in a family that trained everyone to stay silent. "What's wrong?" I asked, cautiously. She wrung her hands, pacing the living room like someone trying to gather courage. "I shouldn't be here," she whispered. "If my mom finds out, she'll never forgive me." "Lucia," I said softly, "please sit." She sat on the edge of the couch, barely touching the cushion, eyes wide with conflict. "I heard them," she blurted out. "My mom, Tadeo, and their lawyer. I wasn't supposed to be home, but I forgot my phone charger and came back early." She swallowed hard. "They weren't just trying to make you look mentally unstable, Marcella. They were planning to push for full legal control of your assets. Not just Tadeo, my mom too." She looked up at me then, her eyes brimming with something between guilt and terror. "They want everything. Your accounts, your company shares, your property. They even talked about making you move in with us for supervision after the court declared you unfit." A coldness spread through my body, not fear, but confirmation. Confirmation that the monster was real. Confirmation that the betrayal had no bottom. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked quietly. Lucia's voice cracked. "Because they're not going to stop. And because you're the only one who was ever kind to me. You treated me better than my own family does." Her confession settled heavily into the silence between us. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, she wiped her eyes and reached into her bag, pulling out a small USB drive. "I recorded them," she said. "All of it. The conversation about declaring you incompetent. The plan to take over your finances. Everything." She placed the drive on the table, as if offering a fragile piece of her soul. I stared at it, feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not naive hope, not foolish hope, but strategic hope. Evidence. Proof. A weapon forged from truth. "Thank you," I said softly, and I meant it. Lucia nodded, then stood abruptly, panic returning to her face. "I have to go. If my mom sees my car parked outside..." She didn't finish the sentence. She rushed to the door, hesitated once, looking back at me with a mixture of fear and gratitude, then slipped out quietly into the hallway. When the door closed behind her, I stood there for a moment in complete stillness. Then I picked up the USB drive, walked to my desk, and plugged it in. As soon as the audio file opened, their voices filled my apartment. Tadeo's frustration, Eulalia's sharp commands, the lawyer's cold strategy. They spoke about me like I was an object. They laughed about how easy it would be to convince a judge. They discussed how much money they believed they'd gain. They even mentioned the exact date they hoped to move into my penthouse once I was pushed aside. I listened to every second of it, not with pain, but with precision. Every word was a nail in their coffin. Every sentence was a rope they had tied around their own ambition. And somewhere in the middle of the recording, as Eulalia's voice dripped with cruelty, and Tadeo's ego oozed through every syllable, I realized something profound. I wasn't just fighting to defend what was mine. I was fighting to end a legacy of manipulation that had poisoned every corner of my marriage. And with this recording, I finally had the weapon that would bring their empire of entitlement crashing down. When the audio ended, I exhaled slowly, my spine straightening with purpose. The war they started was nearing its final chapter, and I was no longer the frightened wife standing at the edge of the battlefield. I was the woman who was going to win. The morning of the hearing arrived with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm, a deceptive calm that settled over Mexico City as the sun rose slowly behind the skyline, casting gold over buildings that looked almost fragile in the early light. I stood in front of my mirror, buttoning the last piece of my tailored navy suit, and for a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back at me. Not because she was different, but because she was finally whole, no longer bent, no longer diluted, no longer begging to be seen. My hands were steady as I gathered the documents, recordings, bank statements, and affidavits that had become the backbone of my defense. As I placed everything inside my leather folder, I caught the faint trembling in my chest. Not fear, but anticipation. The kind you feel when you know something long overdue is finally going to break. The taxi ride to the courthouse felt strangely peaceful. I watched the morning unfold outside the window. Tamal vendors calling out their flavors, school children running toward buses, shop owners raising metal shutters still warm from the night's heat. Life moved as it always had, indifferent to the personal wars being fought behind closed doors. When I arrived, Licenciado Nahira was already waiting at the entrance, his expression serious but confident. Hoy se acaba todo, he said, his voice calm. Today, everything ends. We walked through the courthouse halls, each step echoing against the marble, as the soft hum of legal machinery churned around us. Inside the courtroom, Tadeo and Eulalia were already seated with their lawyer, the same man who had rifled through my private documents during their unlawful intrusion. Eulalia looked at me with an expression that combined hatred and disbelief, as if she'd expected me to crumble before reaching this point. Tadeo couldn't meet my eyes at all. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, shoulders tense, jaw clenched. The judge entered, and the proceedings began. Their lawyer spoke first, constructing a narrative made of half-truths, exaggerations, and outright lies. He described me as emotionally unstable, impulsive, incapable of sound judgment, painting a portrait of a fragile woman too overwhelmed by life to manage her own affairs. He referenced the cancellation of the house payments, the freezing of the accounts, the police report filed after their visit, framing everything as erratic behavior. Then, Tadeo took the stand. Hearing him speak about me as if I were a burden, as if my sacrifices had been inconveniences he endured, as if he had tried his best to support me emotionally while I spiraled into irrationality. It was like listening to a stranger recite fiction with my name pasted on top. The courtroom felt heavy as he spoke, each lie settling into the air like dust. But the worst moment came when Eulalia testified. She held her chin high, acting like a martyr. She painted herself as a vulnerable older woman, devastated by my coldness, claiming I had manipulated her son, framing the house I paid for as an act of charity that had backfired. She even forced tears at one point, tears that dried as quickly as they appeared. When their lawyer rested his case, there was a silence so thick It pressed against the skin. Then Nahera stood, and the real story began. He dissected their accusations one by one, exposing every contradiction, every fabrication. He laid out a timeline supported by evidence. My promotions, my financial stability, my spotless legal record, my professional achievements, all proving the consistency of my judgment. Then he introduced something that shifted the energy in the room entirely. Lucia's testimony. She entered timidly, her eyes avoiding her mother's furious glare. But when she spoke, her voice, though soft, was clear. She described what she overheard. She confirmed their plot to strip me of my assets. She exposed the plan to claim guardianship over me, to seize control of my accounts, to force me into their home under the guise of care. And then she said the words that pierced through the courtroom. My mother and brother didn't want to help Maricela. They wanted to take everything from her. They wanted to erase her. The judge watched intently, expression unreadable. And then came the final blow. The audio recording. Nahera played it, and their voices filled the courtroom. Tadeo's irritation, Eulalia's venom, the lawyer's cold, strategic tone. Together, they painted the kind of truth no argument could unravel. Their own words, their own intent, their own betrayal. When the recording ended, the silence was absolute. Tadeo looked sick. Eulalia looked like someone had ripped the floor from beneath her. Their lawyer whispered urgently to them, but the damage was done. Finally, the judge spoke. Her voice was steady, deliberate, leaving no room for ambiguity. She ruled that I was fully competent, mentally sound, and entirely capable of managing my estate. She dismissed their petition with prejudice, meaning it could not be filed again. She acknowledged evidence of attempted financial exploitation and granted me protective measures, including restraining orders against both Tadeo and Eulalia. Then she looked directly at them and said something I will never forget. You have mistaken this woman's generosity for weakness. That ends today. When the gavel struck, it echoed through my bones like liberation. Outside the courtroom, Tadeo approached, his face pale, voice trembling. Maricela, please, let's talk. I stepped back, holding up a hand to stop him, as if his presence were a gust of wind I no longer allowed to touch me. There's nothing left to talk about, I said. You ended our marriage long before today. Eulalia tried to speak too, but her words dissolved into muffled outrage as security escorted them both away. And just like that, the war was over. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with truth. Weeks later, I sold the apartment that carried too many ghosts and bought a small place overlooking Chapultepec Park, a space filled with light and peace. I donated part of the recovered funds to organizations helping women escape financial abuse. I started painting again. I traveled alone to Oaxaca, then to Puebla, rediscovering the parts of Mexico I had always been too busy or too constrained to see. And one evening, as I watched the sun fall behind the trees in the park, casting long shadows that danced across the grass, I realized something profound. I wasn't just free. I was reborn. My name is Maricela Andrade, and I finally reclaimed the life I almost lost. I learned the hardest, most liberating truth of all. Loving someone should never require you to disappear.